delay, I'd like to introduce our first keynote session of the day. Mary Ellen Dance runs her own mental health therapy practice, Quantum Leap Therapy, in her hometown of Rochester, New York. Along with serving the community and helping people overcome barriers to receiving mental health therapy, Mary Ellen also teaches psychology at Nazareth College. Time permitting, she'll be happy to answer your questions, so please feel free to type them into the Q&A box that you see at the bottom of your screen. And Mary Ellen, thank you for joining us. I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much for having me today. And I do have a PowerPoint, so let me just share my screen. And again, I will try to save time at the end of the session for some questions, but I do have a lot to say. So as Jennifer mentioned, I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I also teach at a college. So I see both the student side of it from teaching at a college, and then I see the outside. I work with a lot of college age students and a lot of adults in my practice. And so none of us are strangers to stress. None of us are strangers to hearing people say that, we need to meditate and journal and do yoga and all of these things for stress. However, I want to go deeper than that today. I want to go deeper than that today because we can all agree that this past year has been very stressful and continues to be stressful, especially in the education world. I know I have been teaching online, as most of us have. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this today, is to go deeper. And I promise I will not tell you to, just tell your students to calm down. We're going to really get into that. So today we're going to talk about what stress actually is, kind of the 3 phases of stress that we go through, and the best ways to relieve stress. And again, yoga is great, but we'll go deeper than that. So first of all, it may seem a little bit silly talking about what stress is, but it's funny because we often don't really know it. This emotion that we're feeling all the time, we don't really know what it's doing to us. And stress is the single most powerful emotion. It is the emotion that has the most influence on us, hands down. Over grief, sadness, anxiety, over any of those scary emotions, stress has more of a powerful influence on us, which is wild because all of us feel stressed usually at some point throughout every day. So stress is actually the reaction that occurs whenever we believe the demands of a situation threaten our ability to respond or react, right? When we believe that we won't know how to cope. And stress is a very evolutionary response, right? So imagine living in caveman days for a second. If we detected danger like a bear or someone coming to take your food or something like that, we'd become stressed. Heart rates would go up, blood pressure would increase, maybe you'd get a little bit sweaty. Your body's preparing to fight or flight. That's a good thing, right? That all has to do with stress because stress is meant to protect us. But nowadays, we aren't living in caves. We typically are not fighting for our food in the wilderness. But we've carried all these bodily responses of stress, and now it's not protecting us anymore. It's just not protecting us anymore. And it's hurting us more than it's doing any good. So speaking of all of that, I want to take a second to note what happens in our bodies when we're stressed, because it's actually really interesting. So without getting too much into the nitty gritty brain stuff here, we've probably all heard of cortisol. Cortisol releases sugars into the bloodstream. And when sugars are released into the bloodstream, that gives us that like adrenaline that helps us to respond. So the cortisol, when cortisol is released, that's triggered by something in the brain called the HPA axis, which is within our sympathetic nervous system. So what that means is, this is a very broad overview. There's a lot more details, but what all that means is our sympathetic nervous system is working really, really hard when we're stressed, right? It's releasing that cortisol. Those sugars are being sent to our blood. But the result of our sympathetic nervous system being aroused and working so hard is that when our sympathetic nervous system is aroused, our parasympathetic nervous system is being suppressed. It's suppressing the parasympathetic nervous system. And guess what the parasympathetic, oh my goodness, guess what the parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for? Relaxation. So not only is our sympathetic nervous system like heightened, going up, the cortisol is going everywhere, but that part of our brain that helps us relax is suppressed. It's not working. So it's important to recognize that, because it's not just the stress in our brain. It's not just all those hormones and the cortisol going on in our brain. It's also that all of that stuff is suppressing the part that helps us relax. So, oh, whoops, I'm not there yet. So remember how I said that stress was the most powerful emotion? Well, cortisol is full of sugar. So it builds up plaque around the heart, which blocks arteries, which causes heart attacks, right? We've probably all heard, we've probably told ourselves, our kids, our spouses, our students, don't be so stressed, you're going to give yourself a heart attack. Well, unfortunately, that's true. And I don't know if we've ever seen that list. It's like a national list of the most stressful life events ranked in order of how stressful they are. The first one is loss of a loved one. The second one, it might be 3, is divorce. But the reason this list of most stressful life events exists is because stress kills people. It truly does, because of all that's happening in our brains and our bodies when it comes to stress. And again, stress was meant to protect us, but it's not doing so anymore. All right, so we know that stress is the most powerful emotion. We know a brief overview of what's going on in our brains, what's going on in our bodies, that it can cause a lot of health problems. I just mentioned heart disease, but there's a lot of other health problems that come along with all this heightened cortisol and what's going on in our bodies. But I want to next review how people typically deal with stress. So we all know that everyone deals with it differently, but there's 3 distinct phases of stress that the experts have come up with based on our actual brain responses. And so that first phase that typically we all go through is alarm. That's the initial phase where it's like, oh, something's wrong. There's a situation that I don't know if I'm going to be able to respond to. There is something wrong. This is a threat. The second phase, which we are typically all living in, is resistance. I'm going to ignore this and hope it goes away. I know I'm super good at this phase. Like, I'm just ignoring it. I'm too busy. And do any of us notice our students doing this? Students thinking that they're too busy to handle their stress and they just need to get their work done. Oh, when the semester's over, I'll let myself be stressed then. I can't. I just got to get through it. I know I've heard that a lot. And then the third phase is exhaustion. And, for me, that's when I call my mom crying and say, I want to be a kid again. I give up, right? For me, that's saying I'm not leaving my house all day or talking to anyone. But for our students, is that skipping class? Is that not following through on assignments? Like, what does that exhaustion phase look like? All right, so just to review before we go on, we know that stress happens when we worry that we won't be able to respond or cope with a situation effectively. And we know that it can have serious damage to us. And although we all react differently, we all typically go through this alarm, resistance, and exhaustion phase, even if those phases may look a little bit different. But what do we do, right? The reason that we are all attending this session, we want to know how to finally manage stress. And like I said, we all know that exercise helps, right? We probably all know a list of things we can do to reduce stress. yoga, talking to a loved one, going for a walk, chamomile tea. I could go on for days. But we still don't do those things. And those things still don't make us not stressed. So that's why I'm here. And that's why I want to go a little bit deeper. And it's interesting because some of you may be thinking, okay, well, if stress is so bad, just tell me how to erase it, get rid of it from my life, just start a war on stress. Or you might be thinking the other side of it, right? Like, this workshop is a waste of time. There's always going to be stress. We're in a pandemic. Like, for heaven's sakes, like, there's going to be stress, right? Don't tell me how to not be stressed, right? I have to be stressed. But I'm not going to say any of that. I'm not going to tell you to not feel stressed again, because we all feel stressed. It is a part of life. And originally it was meant to protect us, right? Sometimes, even though we're not cavemen, sometimes stress can still be good at protecting us. I'm also not going to tell you to take deep breaths or do yoga or any of that, even though those things are wonderful. We all know we should do those things. But what I am going to tell you is this: stress is a part of life, and it will always be a part of life. It will never go away. So those of you who want a war on stress, I hate to break it to you, it's not going away. But stress doesn't have to impact us as much as it does. And it also doesn't have to be as negative as it is. So Kelly McGonigal is a health psychologist at Stanford, and she studies stress and has been studying stress her whole career. And it's super interesting to hear her talk, because she has been studying how to minimize stress, how to get rid of the effects, right? The war on stress, how to get rid of stress. But a lot of research has been done, and Kelly actually changed her field of study. So for however many years, she was studying how to get rid of stress. And now, after more research and more learning, now she's studying to help people view stress more positively, to not get rid of stress, but help people feel resilient towards stress and confident that they can handle stress, because we're not getting rid of stress anytime soon. We as humans have been stressed for our whole existence. So we're not getting rid of it. But can we be more resilient to it? Can we be more confident that we can handle it better? Sounds nice, right? But that's easier said than done. How do we feel confident that we can handle stress? So the single best thing to do is believe that we can handle it. Don't worry, I'm going to go very deep into this, because that's a lot easier said than done. But if we believe that we've been stressed before, we'll be stressed again, and we're resilient to it, we've gotten through it. I mean, heck, we're a year into a pandemic, which I know a year ago I didn't think that we would be here. We're a lot more resilient than we think. One study found that people who believed that stress was harmful for their health, people who thought, who were ill and thought, yeah, if I get stressed, it's going to be so worse and it's going to make me more sick, had a 43% increased risk of dying, versus people who believed that it's not fun, but it's a part of life and they know how to get through it, and that they ultimately would be fine. So how do we believe it? Let's talk about that. In my life, I tend to catastrophize things, meaning I make every little thing into a catastrophe. So I would have this nasty habit of, when I got stressed, I would make it into a big deal. So, like, for example, I would spill coffee on my blouse in the morning on the way out the door. And my brain would say to me, this is it. This is the worst day ever. Might as well just go back to bed and start tomorrow. That obviously increased my stress level. So that's a great example of what not to do. But I see students do this all the time, all the time. Once in a while, I let my students in on the secret that grades don't really matter. I mean, They do. We obviously all know that, but I have students that come to me in tears over an A minus versus an A, right? That's catastrophizing. That's not believing that they can handle stress. And it's funny because the word mindset, that has to do with believing, right? But the word mindset is so popular these days. It's all over social media. I hear college students talking about positive mindset all the time. And isn't that what I mean when I say believe we can handle stress? But as we know, that's a lot easier said than done. It's a lot easier said than done. So now that I've given some examples of not healthy outlooks of stress, like crying over an A minus instead of an A, what actually creates a positive mindset? How do we actually believe that we can handle stress? And how do we teach our students how to do that? Spoiler alert, it's not just thinking happy thoughts, it's a bit more complicated than that. So I'm going to use myself as an example. I am not athletic. Never have been. When I was 5 years old, my parents put me on a soccer team and I cried throughout every game. That pattern was pretty consistent my whole life. But about a year and a half ago, I found a gym that I love and have been going to this gym ever since. So I've kind of turned athletic. And yes, my gym is fantastic, but that's not what changed my motivation. Making schedules to go to the gym did not change my mindset, right? Having an accountability partner, laying my clothes out the night before, like none of that made me believe that I could go to the gym or made me want to go to the gym. So want to know what actually got me to go to the gym? True story. I got a spray tan. And I looked at myself and thought, wow, I look good with a spray tan. I'd probably look better with a spray tan and a six pack. So I tell people this story and they're shocked. They're like, but you're a therapist. You know the benefits of exercise and all of that. Why didn't you just do those things? You know those things are good. Just have a positive mindset. Just believe and do those things. But it doesn't work like that. So for me, the reasons I wasn't going to the gym all had to do with psychology and mental health. It all had to do with what we believe. So psychology says that our mindsets or our attitudes are relatively enduring. That if a person has a strong attitude about something, we're likely not to really veer too much from that strong attitude. So bringing it back to my example that I just used, when I started talking about this, the first thing I said was, I am not athletic. That's why I wasn't going to the gym. It's because I had an enduring attitude and I didn't believe that I could do it. It's the same thing with stress. If we don't believe that we can do it, if we don't believe that we can handle it, if our students don't actually believe that an A minus is okay, it's not going to do anything. So, as much as attitudes are relatively enduring, there are a few things we can do to work on them, right? So if we want to rewire our mindset, obviously, I encourage everyone to go to therapy. But the first way is to challenge ourselves and to challenge our students, to have a more growth mindset. What I mean by this is believing that people and yourself can reach their potential. Believing that mindset is not fixed, that intelligence is not fixed. I see students that say, I'm always going to be a C student. Maybe, but maybe not. That's not fixed. That's more flexible. It's not necessarily, oh, once a slacker, always a slacker. That can be changed. Again, even though mindsets and attitudes are relatively enduring, our attitude about stress, our attitude about not being able to handle stress, about not being able to manage, about always being stressed. I'm never not going to be stressed. Those are relatively enduring mindsets, but they can change. They can change. Um, so going back to my example, when I said I wasn't athletic, remember that story I gave a second ago about crying on the soccer field at 5 years old? That means that since the age of 5, I have believed that I am not athletic. I have been told that by others. It has been proven true by me attempting to do athletic things and not doing them well. I've been told that to myself. Do you think if some 20, 30 years later I see something on social media or someone tells me to just believe in myself or anyone can do it, do you think that I am going to believe them? No, I'm not. I'm probably going to get angry. Have you ever had a student that almost gets like mad at you when you say something encouraging or almost frustrated that you're trying to be encouraging? If you say, you can do it, it'll be fine. The reason that the student responds in that way, or maybe you're the one responding in that way, is because it's going against this attitude that they've had for years and years and years, that they've been told, that they tell themselves, that they hear from people around them. So all those times I tried to get into the habit of going to the gym and failing. All those times started with me saying to myself, I can be athletic. I got this. If this person can do it, so can I. And you guessed it, that nagging voice that said, but I'm not athletic, would come up. So I would give up, right? I would give into that voice. And we all have those nagging voices, and our students have those nagging voices. And right now, stress is almost trendy. I had a student tell me the other day that she likes to take naps and she feels really guilty about taking naps because people judge her. People are saying, well, how can you take a nap? Aren't you stressed? That's probably adding to some enduring attitude in her head. So here's the thing. Being encouraging is wonderful. We obviously want to be encouraging to ourselves, our families, our students, our loved ones. But sometimes our encouraging statements go against what we've believed our whole lives. And that can lead us to feeling, shoot, why does this work for everyone else and not me? What's wrong with me? Or like how I felt with my gym example. Why are people lying to me? I know I'm not athletic. They know I'm not athletic. Stop lying to me. This just feels like pity. Or as students often say, you don't get it. You don't get it. Because I'm saying something to them that's going against what they've been told for their 18 to years of life. So yeah, the story of me getting a spray tan and going to the gym is true, but I left a piece out, a really important piece of what to do with all of this. And the piece I left out is after I got that spray tan and thought, I want a six pack to go along with my spray tan, I thought, you know what? I'm not going to set unrealistic expectations for myself because I always fail. I'm going to try to go to the gym once because I know I can do that, and I'll just see what happens from there. And guess what? It worked. Because taking, positive quotes and encouraging statements are wonderful, but when it goes against that story in our head, they backfire. What we have to do is we have to change the negative story in our heads and in other people's heads, which is really hard to do. But if I had challenged that story by telling myself, no, you can do it, I would have thought that's baloney. I'm not athletic. So if we can keep these things in mind about our beliefs, first and foremost with ourselves, obviously, but also with our students, it's so important. It's going to change our understanding of our own thought processes, our students' thought processes, our understanding of how we interpret stress and interpret the world around us based on these things. And it's going to help us understand that when students don't believe us that an A- is still a great grade, that they're not trying to be difficult. They're not trying to be combative. They've just been told for so long by themselves or by others, or most likely both, that an A- is the end of the world. And so that's how they truly feel. And so who are we to say anything different? And then if that's how they truly feel, then they don't believe that they can handle getting an A-. We don't believe that we can handle stress. And we see how this turns into a cycle. It's a crazy cycle. So an exercise I do with every single client is identifying these negative statements that we've been told our whole lives. Typically, not all the time, but typically a good way to do that is a statement that starts with I am. I am not athletic. I am always going to be stressed, right? A lot of these statements are typically absolutes, like always or nevers. I am never going to be a good job if I don't get, I'm never going to get a good job, excuse me, if I don't get an A in every class, or I have to be the best student, or my life is over. So what I do with clients is I have them identify these negative statements that they've been told and are telling themselves their whole lives. And then I tell them to counteract that statement, not with a, you can do it, but with something they actually believe. Because if I think I am dumb and somebody comes and tells me I'm smart, I'm going to be like, okay, that's really nice, but stop lying to me. But if I think I am dumb and someone comes and tells me, you know what, Mary Ellen, but you're really good at algebra. And a lot of people struggle with that. And see, you're really good at algebra because of this, that, and that reason. I'm going to be like, oh, yeah, I am really good at that. I'm going to believe that. So, like in my gym example, I didn't believe I was athletic. I was never going to believe that I was athletic, but I did believe that I could go to one 45-minute gym class. I did believe that I could survive that. And that is what got me to go to the gym. So if we can start believing that by starting with these small things that we believe, that we can handle stress. Like, okay, this is a really stressful situation, but guess what? We've been through stressful situations before. Our students have probably gotten A- before, and they've, lived to tell the story. So in working with students, trying to counteract with the opposite is just going to frustrate them because they're not going to believe it. They have this story in their head. But maybe if you find something or work with them to find something that they do believe in, that they can hold on to, then we can focus on that. And then we can build off of that and build off of that and build off of that until that I'm not athletic statement gets quieter and quieter and quieter and then goes away. I see a lot of students also that struggle with feeling like they have to be stressed. I'm always going to be stressed. It's just how I am. That stinks. That really, really stinks. So if we come in and say, no, you're not, it'll be fine. That's not going to be helpful. But if we come in and say, look, do you ever have times where you're not stressed? Maybe we can build off of that. And maybe we can do it for ourselves. I saw it recently with my colleagues at the college who part of the semester, they said, I can't do it again. I can't teach online again. I can't do this again with students being quarantined and this, that, and the other thing. Well, guess what? We did it before. We're going to be able to do it again because we're resilient, because we can handle stress. We know we can handle stress. We've handled it before and we're going to handle it again. And hopefully we now understand that believing it is a little bit more complicated than just saying, we got this. Because we all know that that doesn't completely work. So, when we believe that we can handle stress, another really important thing is to accept stress for what it is. It's not the end of the world. It doesn't have to be such a driving force in our lives. It's a bodily reaction that we all have. It's designed to help protect us from threats. But as I've mentioned, in this day and age, it often does way less protecting and way more hurting. As I've mentioned a little bit, right now we kind of have a bit of an obsession with productivity. Students are getting more and more anxious to be productive and to be the best, is what I see. And everyone in at least my office is running around like a chicken with their heads cut off. And if I'm just at my desk being like, I'm good, I can handle this stress, I'm going to get looked at funny. Like the student that I was just talking about who takes naps. And she was like, I feel like I'm being judged. Like, am I doing something wrong because I'm not as stressed as they are? I've been told things like, oh, I wish I wasn't as busy as you. I'd love to be able to have time. I like to read. I read a lot. And so I'm told all the time, oh, I'd love to be able to have time to read. Talk about a backhanded compliment, right? And that makes me feel like, ooh, is it bad that I'm taking time to read? Right? It gets in our heads because we're obsessed with this productivity. And stress, we're almost addicted to stress. And we have to be very careful to recognize when that's happening. To recognize when someone says a backhanded compliment to me about how, oh, I wish I had time to read, that's because we're addicted to stress. We don't know how to handle it, and we're not accepting it for what it is. So, I want to tell you about the metacognitive theory. This theory states that people who struggle with feeling anxious or feeling stressed want that feeling. They hold on to that feeling because they think it's helping them. I hear this with students all the time. Stress motivates me. If I'm not a little stressed, I wouldn't do as well. I work well under pressure. That's another script in our brains that we have to work on changing. Yes, stress is a part of life, but it doesn't motivate us. That's just our brains thinking it motivates us because we're so used to it. It's not what helps us keep going. Even when it feels like that, that's not what it's actually doing. It's tricking us to hold on to stress. And guess what? We can recognize stress. We can let it sit in the passenger seat because it's going to be there. It helps protect us, but we're the one driving the car. And so, going off on that, people also hold on to stress because they don't believe they can handle it. Remember the first step about believing? Or they think they have to be stressed for societal pressures or expectations. But we now all know better. The single biggest way to manage stress is to believe that we can manage it. Believe that what comes at us, we're going to figure out an answer. We're going to figure out a way to do it because guess what? We have in the past. We have our whole lives. And then accepting stress for what it is. It's here. It's going to be here. But I'm going to let it sit in the passenger seat. And I'm going to say, hey, stress, I see you. I believe that I can manage you. So let's keep going. And so if we believe that we can handle stress, if we help our students to believe that they can handle it by going deeper into those mindset things and not just saying, you can handle it. And if we recognize stress for what it is, then we don't have to hold on to stress so much. Then we can let it go. We can recognize that it's not serving us as much as we think it is. We can let it go. We can recognize that, guess what? You'll still be a good student, even if you take naps, even if you're not as stressed. And we can let all of that go a little bit. So again, I didn't tell anyone to tell their students to do yoga or yourself to do yoga, even though those things are great. But understanding what's going on in our brains with stress, understanding what stress does to us, and then looking at it differently, looking at things in a different way is the number one best thing that we can do. All right. So thankfully, we have a little bit of time left. So please send questions in the chat box. There actually already is a question. I stated a statistic earlier that 43% of people had an increased risk of dying, and everybody dies. I apologize. The question was, everybody dies. What do you mean 43% had an increased risk of dying? I apologize for not explaining that as well. It was people who were ill, people who were ill with cancer, with heart disease, with things like that. That had a 43% increased risk of dying from those illnesses. Um, and the next question I have is some good resources that I can share, perhaps some that can be shared with students. So I added some resources at the end of this PowerPoint. I added some resources, and so use those. One of the best resources that I send to students in particular is Psychology Today. Oh, whoops. Psychology Today is a great resource, but it also has a lot of blogs, which is great for students, right? Who don't have a lot of time, who just maybe want like quick fixes. You can search in Psychology Today for like a journal article or a blog article written by someone in the mental health field of 5 best tips to manage stress. Things like that is a really, really good way to do that. Another question that I have is, how do I control stress? That is a really good question. So I do a lot of things to manage stress, like the external things, right? Like the yoga, like the taking walks, like the time for myself. But the biggest thing I do is I check in with where my mindset is at. So if I check in and see that my mindset is not in a great place and I'm not believing I can handle the stress, I'm getting overwhelmed by the stress, I'm focusing too much on it. The stress is in the driver's seat and I'm not. I focus on that. And that's when I talk to a friend, talk to a family member, journal about it, and do these tricks that I just told you. Um, do these tricks that I just told you for myself to recognize where my mindset is along with that, if that makes sense. Another question here is, do you have some good pandemic stress tips for students? Holy cow. I feel so bad for students during this pandemic. I'm so thankful that I didn't go through a pandemic when I was a college student. Um, the best pandemic stress tip that I have for students is to not isolate, which sounds crazy because we're all supposed to be isolating. But to do whatever they can safely over the internet, outside with masks on, whatever it may be, to not isolate, because isolation is bad for all of us as humans, and it's especially bad for some of the vulnerable populations like college students who are very susceptible to developing mental health disorders. And so whatever they can do to not isolate, along with all of these mindset things, can be very important. Um, Another question is, where and how can I get the PowerPoint? I believe that Jennifer is going to send that to you after this. Um, Another question is, what are a few practical academic strategies that are good for college students to employ beyond their mindset? I'm not sure quite what you mean by that, but I'm going to go off of based what I think you're asking is, academic strategies for managing stress. We can go over lots of different study techniques, but at the end of the day, something different works for everyone. And at the end of the day, something different works for me depending on where I'm at. So sometimes going to the gym is helpful for me because it's a stress reliever and I need it and it clears my mind. And then some days it adds stress. So I have to learn how to recognize those things, and recognize, okay, is this helping my stress or not helping my stress in those moments? And again, that kind of goes to the other question about how I handle stress, is checking in with myself constantly about, am I aware that stress is there, but in the passenger seat, or am I letting it take over? So being able to look at that, and being able to look at those things too, like, what am I telling myself? What are these negative things I'm telling myself that's keeping me stuck here, that is not going well for me? And challenging students to do that also.
All right, thank you so much. And I did want to confirm your presentation was wonderful, so helpful, informative. Thank you so much. We will be sharing the PowerPoints afterwards. We'll likely have that on the conference website, just to confirm what you had mentioned there.